The groom never came. Lady Emmeline Ashcombe stood alone at the altar while 300 guests watched her humiliation unfold in whispers and pitying stares. Then she saw him, Nathaniel Blackwood, the feared Duke of Ravensshire, seated among the guests, silent and unreadable. If anyone in that chapel had the power to save her, it was him. So Emmeline did the only thing left. She collapsed. The chapel erupted. The Duke reached her first, catching her before she struck the marble floor. As he loosened the heavy folds of her wedding gown, his hand caught on strange stitching hidden beneath the lining. Not flowers, not lace, words. A confession sewn into silk. By the time he finished reading, he understood two things. The bride had not fainted from shame, and the man who abandoned her was not the greatest danger in that chapel. Chapter 1. The Wedding Without a Groom. St. George's Chapel had never looked so beautiful or so cruel. Morning light poured through stained glass windows, scattering color across 300 guests dressed in their finest silks and pressed wool. Every pew held a name that mattered in London. Earls, barons, their wives dripping in borrowed jewels, their daughters watching with the particular hunger of women who had not yet been chosen. The air smelled of white lilies and candle wax, and somewhere beneath it, of nerves. Lady Emmeline Ashcombe stood at the altar in a gown of ivory silk, her spine straight, her chin lifted, her hands folded before her as though in prayer. She had learned long ago how to appear calm while drowning. The priest cleared his throat for the third time. He glanced toward the chapel doors, then toward the bishop seated in the front row, then back toward his prayer book, as though the words printed there might offer some explanation for what was happening. What was happening was this. The groom had not come. 10 minutes had passed since the ceremony should have begun. Then 20. The choir, uncertain whether to continue singing or fall silent, had done both in uneven bursts, their voices trailing off mid-hymn as though even they sensed something had gone wrong. What does a woman think about, standing before 300 witnesses to her own humiliation, waiting for a man who may never arrive? Emmeline thought about her sister. She thought about Charlotte's laugh, and how she had not heard it in over a year. She thought about ledgers hidden beneath floorboards, about ink-stained fingers copying numbers that were never meant to be seen. She thought about the last time she had asked, directly, where her sister had gone, and the silence that had answered her, colder than any lie. She did not think about Lord Adrian Haversham at all. The whispers began as a murmur and grew like rising water. Has there been an accident? Perhaps he lost his nerve. Poor girl, to be left standing like that. Each word reached Emmeline as though shouted directly into her ear, though no one dared speak above a murmur. Pity, she was learning, could be louder than cruelty. Near the front pew, Lord Percival Ashcombe rose slowly from his seat. His face wore the same expression it always did in public. Warm, patient, faintly sorrowful. The face of a guardian burdened by circumstance rather than a man who had built his fortune on another family's ruin. He moved toward Emmeline with unhurried steps, the steps of a man who wished to appear gentle. "My dear," he said quietly, close enough that only she could hear. "This has gone on long enough. Let us return home before you humiliate yourself further." Home. The word should have meant safety. Instead it meant locked doors and intercepted letters. Meant servants who reported her every movement. Meant a sister who had vanished into silence because she had dared to seek the truth. If Emmeline left this chapel now, she understood precisely what would happen. The scandal would fade within a season. Lord Percival would tighten his grip further, punishing her for the embarrassment she had caused him, and any hope of reaching someone powerful enough to help her would vanish along with her chance to ever be believed. And there, in the third pew from the front, sat the only man in London who might listen. Nathaniel Blackwood, Duke of Ravensshire. He had not whispered. He had not looked away in second-hand embarrassment the way the other guests did. He sat with his arms folded, dark eyes moving across the chapel with quiet, methodical attention. Not the look of a man enjoying a scandal, but the look of a man already asking questions no one else had thought to ask. If he walked out of that chapel without ever learning the truth, Emmeline would lose the only chance she might ever have. So she made her decision. What would you do? If the truth could only reach the world through your own suffering, would you have the courage to fall? Emmeline let her knees give way. The chapel erupted. Gasps rippled through the pews as she crumpled toward the marble floor, her ivory skirts pooling like spilled milk. Somewhere a woman screamed. Somewhere a man shouted for a physician. Lord Percival lunged forward, his composure finally cracking at the edges, but he was too far, too slow. Nathaniel Blackwood reached her first. He crossed the chapel floor in long, unhesitating strides, his coat sweeping behind him, and caught Emmeline before her head could strike the stone. He lowered her carefully, one arm braced beneath her shoulders, his expression sharpening from alarm into focus. "Give her air," he commanded, and the crowd obeyed instantly, stepping back as though his voice alone carried the authority of law. He loosened the high collar of her gown first, then reached for the tightly laced bodice beneath the outer silk, his fingers working quickly, efficiently, the way a man accustomed to crisis might move. That was when he felt it. Not lace, not the delicate boning expected beneath a wedding gown's lining. Stitching, small, deliberate, uneven in a way that no dressmaker would allow unless she had been instructed otherwise. His brow furrowed. His fingers paused. What would you do if you felt something hidden where nothing should be hidden at all? Nathaniel Blackwood was not a man who ignored inconsistency. It was the very trait that had made him feared throughout England, his refusal to look away from what others dismissed as unimportant. He turned the fabric slightly, angling it toward the light spilling through the stained glass above, and found words. Tiny, careful letters, sewn thread by thread into silk that was never meant to be read by anyone but its maker. If you are reading this, I have no one else to trust. My guardian has stolen my inheritance. My sister has been taken because she uncovered his crimes. Please do not let him take me too. Find Charlotte. Nathaniel went very still. Around him, the chapel continued its chaos. Guests murmuring, a physician pushing through the crowd, the priest wringing his hands uselessly. None of it reached him. He read the message a second time, then a third, as though searching for some detail that might soften its meaning. There was none. Slowly, he lifted his gaze from the gown and searched the chapel. He found Lord Percival Ashcombe standing several feet away, and what he saw stopped something cold and certain inside his chest. Lord Percival was not looking at Emmeline's face. He was not asking whether she was injured, whether she needed water, whether a physician should be summoned. He was staring at the gown, at the exact place where Nathaniel's hand still rested against the hidden stitching. What does it mean when a guardian shows no concern for his ward's collapse, only for what her collapse might reveal? Nathaniel had spent years dismantling corrupt estates, exposing men who hid theft behind respectable names and charitable donations. He recognized the particular stillness in Lord Percival's expression. It was not grief. It was fear. The pieces did not yet form a complete picture, but enough of them had settled into place for Nathaniel to understand one truth with absolute certainty. Whatever had happened in this chapel today, it was not merely a groom's failure to appear. Lord Percival stepped forward, his voice pitched low and urgent. "Your Grace, I thank you for your assistance, truly, but she is unwell and requires rest. If you would allow my carriage to take her home." "No." The single word landed in the chapel with the weight of a door closing. Nathaniel rose to his feet, Emmeline still cradled carefully in his arms, her eyes fluttering as consciousness returned. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Every guest within 20 feet had already gone silent, sensing that something far more significant than a jilted bride was unfolding before them. "Lady Ashcombe will leave under my protection," he said, each word deliberate, each word final. Lord Percival's mouth opened, then closed. To object publicly would draw attention he could not afford. To insist further would raise questions he had spent years avoiding. He said nothing at all, and as Nathaniel Blackwood carried Emmeline Ashcombe from St. George's Chapel, past 300 whispering guests who understood only that a wedding had failed, he carried with him a secret stitched in silk, one that promised the true scandal had not yet begun. What do you think Lord Percival fears most? Being exposed, or losing control of a girl who has finally found someone willing to listen? Chapter 2. Secrets behind Ashcombe Hall. Emmeline woke to unfamiliar silence. No creaking floorboards beneath a servant's careful footsteps. No distant murmur of Lord Percival's voice drifting through a closed door. Only the soft crackle of a fire and the faint scent of beeswax candles, rich and clean in a way Ashcombe Hall had not smelled in years. For one suspended moment, she did not know where she was. Panic came first, sharp and immediate. Her eyes flew open, her hand pressed instinctively against her chest, as though she might find Lord Percival standing over her. That familiar, gentle smile stretched across his face, informing her that the wedding, the collapse, the gown, all of it had been nothing more than a fevered dream. What would you feel, waking in a stranger's home after finally daring to fight back? Then she remembered. The chapel, the stitching, the Duke's hands pausing where they should not have paused. Emmeline sat up slowly, taking in her surroundings. A bedchamber far grander than her own, all dark wood and deep blue velvet. Clearly a room in a gentleman's residence rather than a lady's chamber. Someone had removed her wedding gown and dressed her in a simple nightgown, and a maid sat quietly near the window, occupied with needlework. "You're awake, my lady." The maid rose immediately, setting aside her work. "His Grace asked to be informed the moment you stirred." His Grace. Emmeline's pulse quickened, not from fear this time, but from something far more dangerous. Hope. She was brought downstairs within the hour, dressed in a borrowed day gown that fit imperfectly but respectably, and led into a study lined with books from floor to ceiling. Nathaniel Blackwood stood near the window, his back to her, a folded piece of silk resting on the desk before him, her gown's lining. He turned as she entered, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. His dark eyes studied her with the same quiet intensity she had noticed across the chapel. Not the polite, distant curiosity of society, but something closer to genuine attention, the kind rarely offered to a woman who had just humiliated an entire congregation. "You collapsed on purpose," he said finally. It was not a question. Emmeline's throat tightened. There was no use in denying it, not to a man who had already read her confession stitched thread by thread into silk. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "And this," he gestured to the fabric on the desk, "was never meant for a husband to find. It was meant for whoever happened to be closest, wasn't it? A stranger. Anyone at all, so long as they were willing to listen. What does it cost a woman to admit she trusted a stranger more than her own family?" "I had no one else," Emmeline said. Her voice, to her own surprise, did not waver. "Please, Your Grace, I need you to understand everything, or none of this will make sense." Nathaniel gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Then tell me." And so she did. She told him of the accident 3 years past, the overturned carriage on the road from Bath, the parents who had left this world without warning, without preparation, without ever imagining their daughters would be left in the care of a man so carefully disguised as a gentleman. She told him how Lord Percival had arrived within days, composed and sorrowful, ready to shoulder the burden no one else could carry. She told him how the household had changed. Servants dismissed one by one, replaced by faces loyal only to Percival. Letters arriving late, or not arriving at all. Invitations that mysteriously stopped, though she had later learned they had never stopped at all, only been intercepted before reaching her hands. Charlotte was the one who noticed first. Emmeline continued, her fingers twisting together in her lap. She was always the clever one, the stubborn one. She began going through the estate ledgers at night, comparing figures, and she found things that should never have been possible. Farms sold without authority, investments liquidated without explanation, jewelry that had simply vanished from the inventory. She confronted him. She copied everything first, prepared a full account for our family solicitor. Emmeline's voice thinned, memory pressing painfully against her composure. She never delivered it. Within days, Lord Percival announced she had gone to stay with distant relatives. For her health, he said. No address given. No letters ever came. What would you do if the one person who believed you had vanished without a trace? Nathaniel's expression did not change, but something in his stillness sharpened, the way a hunting hound grows quiet the instant it catches a scent. You believe he is holding her somewhere. I know he is, Emmeline said. He told me himself. If I obeyed, she would remain alive. If I did not, she could not finish the sentence. She did not need to. And the marriage to Lord Haversham? Another bargain, she said bitterly. Percival's fortune has been unraveling for years. Debts, failed speculation, money spent faster than he could steal it. He required one final transaction to save himself. My marriage was simply the easiest coin left to spend. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she could not fully read. Why the gown? He asked finally. Why not simply approach me, or anyone else, directly? I was never alone, Emmeline said. Every letter was read before it reached its recipient. Every visitor reported back to him. I could not write a note without it being discovered, could not request a private audience without suspicion following. The gown was the only thing I stitched myself, alone, at night. It was the only truth he never thought to examine. What does it take to hide the truth in the one place no one thinks to look? Something shifted in Nathaniel's face, not pity, which Emmeline had expected and dreaded, but something closer to respect. You are fortunate the groom never arrived, he said quietly. Had the ceremony proceeded, you would have had no chance at all to reveal any of this. I know, Emmeline whispered. I have wondered since this morning whether his absence was cowardice or something else entirely. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly at that, though he said nothing further on the matter, only filed it away, as he seemed to file away every detail, waiting for the moment it might prove useful. I will not send you back to him, he said instead. Not tonight. Not until I understand exactly what we are dealing with. Within days, the investigation had begun in earnest. Nathaniel moved with the same quiet precision that had made him feared throughout London's business circles, never announcing his intentions, never revealing his full hand, simply gathering information piece by careful piece until the picture became undeniable. He hired discreet investigators to trace the sale of Ashcombe farmlands, men skilled at following money through the maze of forged paperwork and false signatures the wealthy so often used to hide their crimes. He visited the family's longtime solicitor personally, a cautious older man who grew pale when shown documents bearing Lord Percival's authorization, documents the solicitor swore he had never approved. These signatures, the solicitor said, turning one particular deed over in trembling hands, are not authentic. I would swear to it before any magistrate in England. What happens when the paper trail of a crime finally begins to unravel? Nathaniel questioned former servants next, those who had been dismissed from Ashcombe Hall in the months following the Ashcombe parents' deaths, women and men scattered across London, now working in lesser households, grateful for the chance to finally speak without fear of consequence. Most knew little. A few knew more than they realized. One elderly former housekeeper recalled, with some hesitation, a carriage arriving late one night, not long after Charlotte's supposed departure. A carriage that had not come from the direction of any relative's estate, but from the docks. It was a small detail, perhaps meaningless. Nathaniel noted it regardless. 3 nights into his search, one final visit yielded what all the others had not. A former stableman, dismissed from Ashcombe Hall shortly after Charlotte's disappearance, agreed to meet Nathaniel in a quiet tavern far from Mayfair's watchful eyes. The man was nervous, glancing toward the door more than once before he finally spoke. I never believed the story about relatives, he admitted, turning his cup slowly between rough hands. I drove the carriage that night myself, Your Grace. Miss Charlotte weren't going to no countryside cottage. We went to the coaching inn outside the city, where she was handed off to another driver entirely, one I'd never seen before nor since. Nathaniel leaned forward, every instinct sharpening. Did you hear a name? Any indication of where she was being taken? Not a name for the driver, the stableman said. But I heard Miss Charlotte weren't to be called by her own name no more. Master's man called her something else entire, right before they left. Sarah, I believe it was. Or something close to it. What does it mean when a family erases a girl's very name to make certain she can never be found? Nathaniel sat back slowly, the pieces finally beginning to arrange themselves into something resembling a shape. Charlotte had not gone to relatives. She had been transported, deliberately, under a false name, hidden not through neglect, but through calculated design. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to ensure she could never be traced, never be found, never be believed, even if she somehow managed to speak. Which meant, for the first time since this investigation began, Nathaniel finally had somewhere to start looking. If a girl could be erased so completely, how far would someone go to make certain she was never found again? Chapter 3. Finding Charlotte. The trail, Nathaniel had learned long ago, was never found in a single triumphant discovery. It was found in fragments, a name here, a payment there, a signature that did not quite match the hand that claimed it. Truth revealed itself slowly to those patient enough to gather every piece before attempting to see the whole. So he gathered. He began with the carriage records the dismissed stableman had described, the coaching in outside London where Charlotte had supposedly been handed to another driver. Innkeepers rarely forgot a well-dressed young woman traveling under guard, especially one who had not gone willingly. A modest bribe loosened the proprietor's memory considerably. I recall her, the man admitted, counting coins with practiced fingers. Quiet thing. Frightened, though she tried not to show it. The driver who collected her paid extra for silence and a private room where she'd not be seen by other travelers. What does silence cost when purchased to hide a crime already in motion? Where was she taken? Nathaniel asked. Can't say for certain, Your Grace. But the driver mentioned a physician traveling with them. Said the young lady required rest and quiet, on account of her nerves. A physician. Nathaniel filed the detail away and moved to his next thread, the estate's financial records, painstakingly reviewed alongside the family solicitor. Buried among legitimate expenses for tenant repairs and household accounts, he found a curious recurring payment, modest but consistent, made quarterly to a Dr. Edmund Colby. No record existed of Dr. Colby ever attending Ashcombe Hall, nor did any record explain why a physician unconnected to the family received steady payment from Lord Percival's private accounts. Nathaniel visited him directly. Dr. Colby proved to be a nervous man with ink-stained fingers and eyes that would not quite meet Nathaniel's gaze. He denied everything at first, denied knowing any Ashcombe, denied receiving payment from any lord, denied treating any young woman kept against her will. What does a man's fear reveal when innocence requires no defense at all? It was only when Nathaniel produced the ledger, the physician's own signature plainly visible beside each payment, that the man's composure finally broke. I did not know the whole of it, Colby insisted, his voice thin with panic. I was told only that the young lady suffered delicate nerves, that her family wished her cared for privately, away from society's judgment. I never asked further questions. I never wished to know. Where is she now? The physician hesitated, glancing toward the door as though expecting Lord Percival himself to appear. A private house, he finally admitted. Just beyond Richmond. Discreet. The sort of place families send relatives they wish quietly forgotten. Nathaniel required no further persuasion. The house, when he found it 3 days later, presented itself as an unremarkable countryside residence. Modest, well-kept, entirely unremarkable to any passing traveler. Nothing about its quiet gardens or curtained windows suggested confinement. That, Nathaniel understood immediately, was precisely the intention. What kind of prison disguises itself as an ordinary home? He arrived not with force, but with law. A magistrate accompanied him, along with proper documentation questioning the legality of the residence's operation, for the house held no legitimate license to confine patients, and Dr. Colby's sworn statement provided more than sufficient cause for immediate inspection. The proprietress who answered the door, a severe woman with a ring of keys at her waist, attempted denial for exactly as long as it took the magistrate to produce his authority. Then she led them inside. Charlotte Ashcombe occupied a small room on the upper floor, sparse but not cruel in its furnishings, the kind of careful restraint designed to avoid outright accusations of mistreatment while ensuring complete isolation. She sat near the single window when they entered, and Nathaniel understood at once, watching her rise with wary, guarded eyes, that she had learned not to trust any face that appeared in that doorway. Miss Ashcombe, he said gently. You are safe. I have come on your sister's behalf. Charlotte's expression did not soften. My guardian has sent men to retrieve me before, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. Each time, they claimed to be friends. Rescuers. I no longer believe such claims easily. What does it take to earn the trust of someone betrayed so many times before? Nathaniel did not argue. He did not attempt to persuade her through words alone, understanding that words had likely been used against her too many times already. Instead, he stepped aside. Emmeline entered the room. For one suspended moment, neither sister moved. Then Charlotte's composure shattered entirely, and she crossed the small room in 3 swift steps, gathering her sister into an embrace that carried the weight of every month they had been forced apart. I thought I might never. Charlotte's voice broke. I feared you had married him. I feared I would never see you again. I collapsed at my own wedding to make certain that never happened, Emmeline said, half laughing, half weeping. You would have been proud, I think. Only then did Charlotte turn back toward Nathaniel, her wariness finally beginning to ease into something like cautious gratitude. You truly are not one of his men. I am the opposite of one of his men, Nathaniel said quietly, and I intend to see him answer for everything he has done to both of you. Charlotte's eyes sharpened at that, sudden purpose replacing months of quiet despair. Then you will need proof, she said. I copied everything before he took me. Every falsified ledger entry, every forged signature, every illegal sale. I hid the documents before his men arrived, in the one place I believe they would never think to search. What does desperation teach a woman when she knows her only weapon is the truth itself? She retrieved them within the hour. Papers sewn carefully into the lining of an old traveling case, preserved through months of confinement, waiting patiently for the moment someone might finally come searching for them. Nathaniel examined the documents by lamplight that evening and felt the final pieces of the puzzle lock firmly into place. Forged signatures matched precisely against legitimate ones Charlotte had also preserved for comparison. Dates of illegal property sales aligned exactly with the mounting debts uncovered in Lord Percival's private accounts. Every fragment, gathered across weeks of careful investigation, now formed an unmistakable, undeniable whole. It was, at last, enough. What happens to a man who believes himself untouchable the moment the truth finally catches him? Lord Percival learned of Charlotte's escape within 2 days. The proprietress of the private house, terrified of prosecution herself, had sent immediate warning the moment the magistrate departed. By the time the message reached him, Percival understood precisely what it meant. His carefully constructed deception had finally begun to collapse, thread by thread, in exactly the manner Emmeline's confession once had. He did not panic. He had never been a man who panicked visibly. Instead, he acted with the same cold precision that had sustained his deception for years. Within hours, he burned every remaining ledger in his private study, every document that might still connect him directly to the forged signatures and stolen inheritance. Ash filled his hearth long into the night, erasing years of carefully hidden crimes into nothing but smoke and silence. What does a guilty man destroy first, when he finally understands he has lost control? But destruction alone would not save him. He required something more, a story powerful enough to shift London's judgment away from himself entirely. By morning, Lord Percival Ashcombe stood before his closest society connections with practiced sorrow etched carefully across his face, and delivered an accusation calculated to destroy the one man capable of exposing him. The Duke of Ravensshire, he announced gravely, has abducted both of my wards under false pretenses. He removed Lady Emmeline from her own wedding, and now has unlawfully seized her sister from a private residence entirely, without my consent or knowledge. The claim spread through London with devastating speed. By evening, whispers that had once pitted Emmeline's abandoned wedding now carried an entirely different tone. Dark speculation about a duke feared for his ruthlessness, now suspected of far greater crimes than mere business rivalry. What happens when society chooses the comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth? Nathaniel Blackwood, who had spent years dismantling corruption without ever fearing the consequences to his own reputation, now found himself, for the first time, standing on the opposite side of public judgment. And Lord Percival, watching his accusation take root across every drawing room in London, allowed himself, at last, a small and dangerous smile. Chapter 4. A Marriage Chosen Freely. Public accusation, Nathaniel understood, could not be answered with anger. It could only be answered with proof. While Lord Percival's carefully rehearsed story spread through London's drawing rooms, Nathaniel worked with quiet, deliberate patience, assembling everything Charlotte's hidden documents and weeks of investigation had uncovered into a case no magistrate could dismiss. What weighs heavier in the end, a loud accusation or a quiet truth? He presented it not to society, but to the one place where whispers held no power at all, a court of law. The evidence, laid bare before magistrates and barristers, told a story far darker than any drawing room gossip could invent. Forged signatures on estate transfers, matched precisely against Charlotte's preserved originals. Payments to Dr. Colby, proving unlawful confinement disguised as medical care. Testimony from dismissed servants, the stableman, the coaching inn's proprietor, each fragment locking into place beside the last. Bribery, witness intimidation, years of stolen inheritance, concealed behind a gentleman's reputation built entirely on lies. Lord Percival's composure, so carefully maintained through every prior confrontation, finally abandoned him entirely the moment the verdict was read aloud. What does it feel like to watch a lifetime of careful deception collapse in a single sentence? He was arrested within the hour, convicted within the month, his once admired name now spoken only with contempt in the same drawing rooms that had praised his charity and his manners. The Ashcombe estate, its lands, its accounts, its long-neglected fortune, was formally restored to Emmeline and Charlotte, along with every acre and shilling Percival had stolen across 3 years of quiet theft. Justice, at last, had arrived. But justice, Nathaniel understood, was not the same as healing. In the months that followed, he made a decision that surprised even those who knew him best. He did not press Emmeline toward any further arrangement between them. He did not visit with expectation, nor speak of futures neither of them had earned the right to imagine yet. Instead, he encouraged her to rebuild. What does a woman need most, after years of losing every choice that should have been hers? Emmeline returned to Ashcombe Hall with Charlotte at her side, the two of them slowly restoring what had been neglected, not merely the estate's finances, but its warmth, its life, the household staff chosen now by their own judgment rather than another man's design. She learned, for the first time in years, what it meant to make a decision simply because she wished it, without fear of consequence trailing behind it. Nathaniel visited, but never insisted. He wrote, but never demanded response. When invited to dine at Ashcombe Hall, he came as a guest, not a suitor, content to discuss estate matters, London politics, Charlotte's sharp opinions on subjects most gentlemen believed unsuitable for young ladies. Slowly, gratitude softened into friendship. Friendship, given enough patient months, deepened into something neither of them named aloud. How does love arrive when it is never chased, only allowed to grow at its own quiet pace? It was Emmeline who spoke first. On an evening in early autumn, walking together through Ashcombe Hall's gardens while Charlotte remained inside, absorbed in yet another ledger she now reviewed purely for her own satisfaction, Emmeline stopped beneath the bare branches of an old elm tree and turned to face him directly. "You have never asked me for anything," she said. "I did not wish you to feel obligated," Nathaniel replied. "You have spent enough of your life feeling as though you owed something to someone." "I know." Emmeline's voice remained steady, though something warmer had crept into it. "That is precisely why I am asking you instead." Nathaniel went still. "I do not want a marriage born from rescue," she continued. "Not gratitude, not duty. I have had enough of arrangements built on obligation to last several lifetimes." She met his eyes fully, without hesitation, without fear. "I want a marriage chosen freely. By me. Because I wish it, and for no other reason at all." What does it mean, to finally be asked instead of told? Nathaniel's answer required no deliberation. "Then let it be chosen," he said quietly, "by both of us." The wedding that followed bore no resemblance to the one that had come before it. There were no 300 guests crowding St. George's Chapel, no carriages lined for streets, no whispers rippling through curious pews. Instead, a small country chapel near Ashcombe Hall welcomed only those who mattered most. Charlotte, radiant and fiercely proud, standing as witness beside a handful of trusted friends and household staff who had remained loyal through every difficult year. No spectacle, no gossip waiting eagerly outside the doors, no fear trailing behind the bride as she walked toward the altar. What does a wedding look like when nothing about it is forced? As Emmeline walked the short aisle toward Nathaniel, she smiled, fully, easily, without the careful composure she had once worn like armor before 300 watching strangers. It was, she realized, the first time she had ever smiled at her own wedding without pretending. Nathaniel watched her approach with the same quiet intensity he had shown her from the very first moment in that chapel months ago, though now it carried none of the caution, none of the searching suspicion. Only certainty. They were married quietly, completely, exactly as Emmeline had asked. Epilogue. Years later, in a bright upstairs room of Ashcombe Hall, Emmeline opened an old traveling chest and lifted free the ivory wedding gown she had never quite been able to discard. The stitching remained, hidden carefully within the lining, faded now with time, but still legible to anyone who knew precisely where to look. Charlotte, arriving with two young nieces trailing curiously behind her, glanced at the gown with familiar affection. "You still have not removed it," she said, nodding toward the hidden confession sewn so long ago. "No," Emmeline said, smiling as she smoothed the delicate silk beneath careful fingers. "Why keep it?" Charlotte asked. "The danger has long since passed." Emmeline considered the question for a moment, memory carrying her back to a chapel filled with whispering strangers, to trembling hands stitching desperate words by candlelight, to a duke's fingers pausing over threads that were never meant to be found. What remains, once fear has finally been answered by courage? "Because it reminds me," she said softly, "that one desperate stitch changed every life that followed." Nathaniel entered the room then, drawn by his daughter's laughter, and paused beside his wife, his hand settling naturally over hers atop the folded gown. The silk was carefully returned to its chest a moment later, no longer a symbol of fear or desperation, but of the singular courage that had transformed a ruined wedding into the quiet beginning of a life Emmeline had finally chosen for herself.
Subscribe for more interesting Duke-related stories.